government considers its response to the Omicron variant and the rise in infections. The Consumer Goods Council of South Africa has advised against restrictions on the liquor sector. It says the liquor sector and the entire value chain can't afford another period of restricted trading. The council adds that further restrictions would accelerate the eventual demise of some operators and lead to irrecoverable job losses. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Momodu, the council's legal regulatory and sustainability executive, as well as the Restaurant Association of South Africa CEO, Wendy Alberts. Good evening to you both, and thank you very much for your time and joining us on In Focus. Now, let's start with you. I mean, in your view, the restrictions have not been effective at all?
Thank you very much, Thabo, for having me on your show. And apologies, I couldn't do a Zoom call because I'm in an area where I don't have good coverage. And good evening to your viewers. Yes, we've done extensive research over the past few months since the beginning of the lockdown regulations, particularly on liquor, in last year. And our research has shown that there has not really been much of an effective, control of COVID rising numbers because of the restrictions of alcohol. What we have actually seen is that whenever there are announcements of this type of nature, the illicit market grows significantly. So people still consume alcohol, and when you look at what is happening now, we have been told, and we've been following the signs very, very closely, that it seems that the challenges or the concerns that the government had previously in terms of, hospital beds being flooded doesn't seem to be the case. What we would like to place on the record is that there has not been a direct correlation between the rise of COVID-19 cases and the consumption of alcohol, and we therefore do not see the need for government to actually restrict alcohol. This, with the realization that we acknowledge that there has to be some responsibility for all of us as South African, including government, to continue to look for ways of saving lives and livelihoods. And we are proponents of saying that we are in support of what the president announced the last time he spoke in terms of the task team that she was saying should be established to investigate the possibility of mandatory vaccination. And to this end, our members, and I'm sure Wendy as well will speak to some of her members that have been very, very supportive of government on the ground, either becoming vaccination centers themselves or pushing communication messages that encourage South Africans to vaccinate. Our retailers have been at the forefront of this. And some of our members as well now are looking at mandatory vaccinations because we believe that this is that silver bullet that will help us cross this challenge called COVID-19. And that restrictions we can ill afford as a country to actually close down the economy. Yeah. If you let me just finish, if you look at the retail sector itself, the sector has got more than 14,000, independent retailers. Most of them happen to be black-owned, and they employ a lot of female employees. Last year, during the lockdown, thousands of jobs were lost in this industry because the lockdowns, did not come with the relief of people or businesses still being able to pay their rents and everything. The costs were rising, but they were not trading. So we're saying this is a sector that is now beginning to recover from the previous lockdowns. And like I said, we can ill afford to have any more restrictions, but we are here to work with government to find other means, including vaccinations, of getting our country over this hurdle of winning this battle of COVID-19.
Right. Wendy, as the association, you've got even a further suggestion to government. You're saying they need to change the way in which they view the data and no longer focus on the number of hospitalizations. What informs that view?
If we look now on the view that although the rate of new infection is sharply, infection, what we've done is to talk about hospitalization. We go back to the beginning of lockdown.
Oh, sorry, Wendy. think we have a challenge there with your line. Let's try and establish a little bit of a better connection there with Wendy Alberts. I'm very interested in hearing what you've got to say. But Nell, let's come back to you. You've got an interesting data that you're pointing to this question of retail being opened for 4 days, saying that makes no difference to consumption. Instead, what actually happens there?
So what we haven't understood as the Consumer Goods Council in the retail sector is, whenever the restrictions were imposed on government, they had this differentiated approach where we think it's discriminatory and actually bordering on being uncompetitive. So you would have the off-site guys, who are the ones that we call the normal bottle stores, your Tops, your blue bottle, solid crema, not trading for 7 days. And you'd have other sectors that actually operate on-site, trading for 7 days. The argument we've always had is, if you say that, if government says that, when people drink, the likelihood of COVID spreading is very, very high. Why is it justifiable for them to close a sector that we consider to be safe? So whenever you go to a bottle store, you don't sit down. You get your beverage, you go out, and you go and enjoy it in the comfort of your home, right? So the likelihood of you actually spreading COVID is very, very minimal, And I'm not saying that, others are more dangerous. But what I'm saying is that you can go to a retail, buy milk, but you can't go across to the next aisle and buy a bottle of wine simply because that is considered to have more COVID than the other aisle that's got milk. It doesn't make sense. We're saying that the issue of parity should prevail because there's no justification from a research perspective, from a science perspective, why government continues to have this discriminatory approach of shutting down the on-site liquor sales the off-site liquor sales, while the off-site continues to trade for 7 days. Our sector, as the Consumer Goods Council, has really suffered enormously. And like I said, there has not been a great understanding, perhaps, that the ones that suffer are really small retailers, small businesses, some of them in townships, in rural communities. And we are saying that government cannot carry on doing this type of thing. And we urge that the issue of parity is looked at. But more importantly, I think the bigger argument is not on-site versus off-site anymore. It's about economic recovery, and that no sector should now actually ever be closed down, and we should look at alternatives as South Africans to move beyond, restricting any businesses, because we cannot afford to have this type of thing with the levels of unemployment that we have in this country.
All right, now we seem to have Wendy back on the line. Sorry, Wendy, that line there today clearly giving us a challenge with the connection. So let's talk once again. You're saying that the change in the viewing of the data is now more helpful as opposed to looking at the rate of infection, but rather look at the rate of hospitalizations.
Absolutely. No, the narrative has always been about the numbers, and when the numbers reach a certain position, then we know that it's imminent that there's going to be an announced lockdown. And what we've certainly done over this last time frame is we've ascertained how many beds are available. So we certainly, in anticipation for the fourth wave, have been looking at how we can preempt it, how we can certainly avoid an unannounced lockdown, and how we can certainly avoid any type of lockdown or restriction at a crucial time through the holiday season, which is a springboard for us to try and recover some form of financial recovery. What we certainly have noted is that while the numbers rise, the hospital beds have not been occupied. And, we give enormous thanks to Netcare for the announcement of the data that they have put up there. And it certainly has changed the narrative, because the hospital beds outline the severity of what the infection is at a time like this. When the Omicron variant was announced, we saw many people had made cancellations in our restaurants. We also saw, obviously, with the international ban, the impact that it had on our industry and how many cancellations took place. We were heavily reliant on the recovery and utilizing that space to be able to pay back some of the debt that we're so heavily indebted to. And this just shows that we need to, refer to scientific evidence. We need to have proper data, and we need to make common sense. Our industry is not in a position to entertain any type of lockdown through this critical time. the vulnerable people lost jobs. It took us a very long time to reopen the industry. We have found that the unannounced lockdowns certainly have the biggest financial impact on our businesses, and there simply isn't the cash flow to restart those businesses. And we've only just had some staff returning to the industry to get a job after some 2 years of unemployment. So it's critical that we really do look at the hospitalizations, understand how many beds are available. And with the loss of revenue and tax, we could have certainly have made those extensions in the hospitals, prepared those beds from the private sector, and not have had the economic impact that we put the industry under and survive a large portion of the economy. But, what I always remind everybody, we're not COVID experts. We weren't COVID experts, but now we all need to work in a collaborated way where we can find viable solutions that have the least amount of impact on the economy, on our industry, and most importantly, on employment.
All right. Wendy, appreciate your time now, and thank you very much for coming through. So we have to leave it for tonight. When we